Good afternoon. I'm Ed Pozzuoli, CEO of Tripp Scott, and with us today is my fellow director, Catalina Avalos. Catalina, welcome.
Good afternoon.
Talk about what business owners, business operators should be concerned with as they bring their employees back into the workplace.
Sure, and I think we can summarize it maybe in 3 points. One is workplace safety. Second is communication. How do we communicate what we want to implement to the employees? And number 3 is how do we limit the exposure to the company?
Let's start with the first one, workplace safety.
With workplace safety, I think it's important to communicate to the employees what safety precautions the employer is going to take. For example, are you going to take the employee's temperature? Make sure that the employee knows that the log is going to be kept in a private file, because the employees are entitled to privacy because it's technically a medical information that is being kept on that employee. How are you going to implement that at the workplace? Are you going to have a separate office where you're going to have the employee report every day? How are you going to monitor that every employee has been subjected to the screening? What other type of screenings are you going to ask? What questions are you going to ask in order to have them screened before coming into the workplace to ensure that they are not displaying any of the symptoms, and to make the other employees comfortable, because that's one of the important things, is for everybody in the workplace to feel comfortable and safe.
So what would be an appropriate question or two?
So one question is, have you come into contact with anyone who has been tested positive for COVID-19, or has anybody in your household come into contact with somebody who's tested positive with COVID-19? And you can either ask that question every day, or you ask it the first couple days and then say, if something changes, let me know. You also need to make sure that you talk to them about wearing protective equipment, whether it's masks, and where are they going to wear them, when do they have to wear them, designate areas, how are they going to walk through the office, perhaps stagger the shifts. And one important aspect of all this is try to communicate to your employees that these changes or these policies are going to take place prior to them coming in and reporting the first day, to kind of eliminate some of that anxiety, and then they're prepared for it and it will be much more well received.
Gotcha. And then how do you limit, from a standpoint of limiting liability?
Sure.
Let's first talk about employer-employee liability issues.
So as the employer, what are the responsibilities and the duties of the employer? It's really no different than before. You know, employers are bound by OSHA guidelines. They have to provide a safe environment, which is why we talk about the workplace safety issues. Make sure that we have implemented cleaning, that we continue to tell the employees to follow CDC guidelines. We're all on uncharted waters, right? Everybody's kind of going through this, but there's a lot of guidance from the CDC, there's a lot of guidance from OSHA, and what the employer needs to do is be reasonable, make sure that they are implementing these guidances that are coming from the regulatory agencies, and make sure that they're communicating them and enforcing them across the board. In other words, everybody needs to follow the directions.
Right, so it doesn't matter who you are, whether you're the owner of the business or the receptionist or waiter or somebody like that. Everybody needs to do it.
Sure, I would say even the owner of the business more importantly, because you need to lead by example.
Gotcha. Does that change when there's a public-facing business? So as an example, when you're dealing with members of the public as they come in, either as clients or consumers, do those responsibilities change, or do they become more acute?
Well, it's a different relationship, right? Employer-employee versus the consumer and the business. But from our perspective, what we're advising our clients is make sure that if you have the public coming in, ask them to do the same thing that your employees are doing, right? Wear a mask, keep the social distancing, follow the paths that are being set within, I think everybody's familiar with Publix, right? You go into Publix, you have the arrows, they don't want people congregating, they want to implement social distancing, as well as making sure that proper hygiene is being maintained by the employees. And there's been talk about perhaps some businesses having a liability waiver, kind of like when you go to the gym and you have to sign a waiver, whether some business want to consider doing that for their customers coming in.
And then let's go back to the employee issue, employers. Right now, there seems to be some level of incentive for some people to stay unemployed as opposed to coming in and getting re-employed or rehired by their former employer. How do you incentivize people to come back to work?
So we have been seeing that. A lot of the clients have been calling back saying, we're reopening, have called a few of our employees to come back. and they're saying, well, I make more on unemployment, collecting more from unemployment benefits. So the way to incentivize them is, first of all, those benefits are going to run out at a certain time, right? And
the end of July.
So they're going to run out, and we cannot operate a business without employees. So I think an open discussion has to have with the employee. They need to understand that if they can't come back, or they're not going to come back, that maybe their job is not going to be available at that time. The Department of Labor is giving some guidance and saying, have discussions with your employees, have an interactive discussion based on the needs of the employee and the needs of the business. If you can try to accommodate them, you do that. But at the end of the day, the businesses have to operate. They need their employees, and sometimes hard decisions are going to have to be made.
What if you're faced with an employee who has some anxiety about coming back into the workplace? How do you manage that?
And you're going to have that, and we're seeing it. One of the ways is communicating. I've seen it where employees were hesitant to come back, but then they do come back, or you communicate all the steps as an employer that you're taking to try to maintain the workplace safety. And once they come in, they feel very comfortable because they see that the employer is taking it seriously. There are some that won't have that, right? So you'll have to have a discussion on a case-by-case basis, and ultimately, both the employer and the employee are going to have to decide what's the best course of action for each of them. And sometimes that's going to mean that they might have to part ways. You might have to terminate that employee, or you might have to furlough them, or allow them to take paid time off with or without leave. It just depends on a case-by-case basis.
Gotcha. So really the communication here is the key.
Communication is the key, and I will tell you that that's one of the things the Department of Labor is looking at pretty closely in order to determine whether the employer acted reasonably under the circumstances.
So we have to make sure that hopefully everybody will act reasonably, but clearly we're advising our clients to act reasonably where they can.
Yes, instead of taking a reactionary and maybe getting upset over an employee saying, no, I don't want to come back, engage in that discussion, try to hear what the situation is, and then make a determination on a case-by-case basis.
Gotcha. And so don't leave your common sense at the door.
Absolutely.
Okay. And with that, Catalina, thank you so much for
joining
us
Ed.
tonight. Thank you.